On a winter morning in February 2009, beneath the vast Colorado sky where the Rocky Mountains meet the eastern plains, a mother placed a phone call that would echo through 16 years of silence. Her voice trembled as she reported that her 9-year-old daughter had not returned home from what should have been a simple walk to a friend's house 3 blocks away. The streets of this small community, population barely reaching 4,000 souls, had always felt safe enough that children rode bicycles without helmets and neighbors left front doors unlocked. But on that particular Saturday, February 14th, as Valentine's Day decorations fluttered in windows along Main Street, something had shifted in the fabric of ordinary life. The question that would haunt investigators, torment a family, and eventually shock an entire community was not whether something terrible had happened, but rather who among them could have allowed it to happen. And more troubling still, had that person been hiding in plain sight all along? The town sat at an elevation where prairie grass gives way to foothills, a place where agricultural heritage collided with modern subdivisions built during the housing boom of the early 2000s. Main Street ran north to south for exactly 12 blocks, lined with businesses that had weathered multiple recessions. A hardware store operated by the same family since 1947. A diner that served breakfast until 2 in the afternoon. A single-screen movie theater that showed films 3 weeks after they premiered in Denver. The elementary school occupied 4 acres on the eastern edge of town, its playground equipment installed through fundraisers and volunteer labor. On any given weekday, you could hear the metallic clang of the swing set from 2 blocks away when the wind came from the right direction.
The Martinez family lived in a modest ranch-style home on Cottonwood Drive, a street developed in 1998 when the local economy briefly surged due to a manufacturing plant that would later close. Jennifer Martinez, age 32, worked as a dental hygienist in a practice 20 miles away in the county seat. Her husband, Robert Martinez, age 34, had been employed at that same manufacturing plant until its closure in 2007, after which he cycled through several positions: warehouse worker, delivery driver, construction laborer when weather permitted. They had 2 children. Their daughter, Sophia Martinez, had turned 9 years old exactly 1 week before that Valentine's Day weekend. Their son, Gabriel, was 6. Sophia was the kind of child teachers described as conscientious. She completed homework assignments days before they were due. She organized her bookshelf alphabetically. She had recently started a journal with a purple cover where she drew pictures of horses and wrote about wanting to become a veterinarian. Her best friend, Emma Richardson, lived 3 blocks west on Aspen Lane, and the 2 girls had established a weekend routine of alternating houses for what they called their art club, which mostly involved craft projects spread across kitchen tables while they listened to pop music on portable CD players. That Saturday morning began like countless others. The temperature hovered around 38 degrees. Patches of old snow lingered in shaded areas where the February sun could not reach. Robert Martinez had left the house at 6:45 in the morning for a shift at a warehouse distribution center, a temporary position he had secured through an employment agency. Jennifer had worked a half day on Friday and had the weekend off. She made pancakes for breakfast. Sophia wore her favorite purple sweater, the one with silver stars embroidered on the sleeves. Gabriel watched cartoons in the living room. At approximately 9:15 in the morning, Sophia asked permission to walk to Emma's house. The Richardson family expected her. The 2 girls planned to work on Valentine cards they were making for their classmates. Jennifer Martinez would later tell investigators that she had no reason to refuse. The walk was straightforward. Down Cottonwood Drive to the corner, turn right on Pine Street, continue for 2 blocks, turn left on Aspen Lane. Sophia had made this walk dozens of times. The neighborhoods felt safe. Parents allowed their children this small measure of independence. Jennifer watched from the front window as Sophia walked down the driveway. The girl wore a pink backpack containing art supplies. She had pulled her dark hair into a ponytail. She turned at the corner and disappeared from view. The time was 9:22 in the morning. Jennifer would remember this detail with absolute certainty because she had glanced at the microwave clock before returning to the kitchen to clean up from breakfast. For those who have ever felt that terrible moment when ordinary time fractures into before and after, what happened next unfolded with the cruel slowness of inevitability. At 11:37 in the morning, Jennifer's phone rang. It was Maria Richardson, Emma's mother, calling to ask what time Sophia would be arriving. The question made no sense. Sophia had left more than 2 hours earlier. The walk took 15 minutes at most, even if a child stopped to examine every interesting rock and bare tree branch along the way. Jennifer felt her stomach drop in a way that she would describe years later as knowing, that immediate physical recognition that something had gone fundamentally wrong. She told Maria she would call back. She grabbed her coat. She ran outside without bothering to zip it. She walked the route herself, calling Sophia's name. She checked the small park halfway between the houses, where a slide and swing set stood empty. The swing moved slightly in the breeze, its chain creaking. A red toy truck lay on its side near the base of the slide, abandoned by some other child on some other day. She knocked on doors. She stopped a man walking his dog and asked if he had seen a 9-year-old girl in a purple sweater. He had not. She called Robert at work. His supervisor had to find him in the warehouse. When he answered, Jennifer could barely form words. He left immediately. By the time he arrived home, Jennifer had called the local authorities. It was 12:03 in the afternoon. The first deputy arrived at 12:19. His name was Kenneth Lawson, a 10-year veteran of the county department who had responded to countless calls in this quiet community. Noise complaints, minor traffic incidents, the occasional domestic dispute. He took down the information methodically. Description of the child, description of clothing, time last seen, intended destination. He radioed for additional units. He began walking the route himself, checking yards, peering into parked cars, knocking on doors that Jennifer had already tried. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 deputies were canvassing the area. By 2 o'clock, volunteers had begun arriving. The fire department organized search teams. Someone brought maps and divided the town into grids. The local radio station broadcast an alert. People emerged from their homes and businesses to help look. They searched alleys, checked dumpsters behind the grocery store, walked along the irrigation canal that ran along the southern edge of town. They called Sophia's name until their voices grew hoarse. Clear's throat. The Richardson family told deputies that Sophia never arrived at their house. Emma had been waiting by the front window. She never saw her friend. This meant that somewhere along those 3 blocks, along streets lined with houses where people had been drinking morning coffee and reading newspapers, and living their ordinary Saturday lives, a 9-year-old girl had simply ceased to exist. As daylight faded on that Valentine's Day, search teams brought in portable lights. The temperature dropped into the 20s. Robert and Jennifer Martinez stood in their driveway, watching vehicles come and go, watching neighbors they had known for years walk past carrying flashlights, watching the terrible machinery of a missing child investigation grind into motion. Deputies had asked them to stay home in case Sophia returned, in case she called, in case there was a ransom demand, though no one wanted to speak that possibility aloud. Inside the house, Gabriel sat on the couch where he had been watching cartoons 12 hours earlier. He asked when his sister would come home. Jennifer told him soon. She did not know what else to say. The swing hung still in the backyard. The toy truck lay on its side in the park. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, Sofia Martinez existed as a question mark, a gap in the world, a child who had walked out her front door and vanished as completely as if the earth had opened and swallowed her whole. The investigation. The search operation expanded with the methodical intensity that marks the first 72 hours of a missing child case. By Sunday morning, February 15th, more than 200 volunteers had joined law enforcement from 3 counties. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation sent specialists. The FBI field office in Denver dispatched agents trained in child abduction cases. They established a command center in the high school gymnasium. Maps covered folding tables. Coordinators divided the search area into increasingly wider circles radiating from the last confirmed sighting. Teams worked in shifts. They searched every structure within a 5-mile radius. Barns, sheds, abandoned homesteads dating back to when this land was still being farmed by families who had claimed it generations earlier. They brought in search dogs. The animals picked up Sofia's scent along her intended route, following it down Cottonwood Drive, around the corner onto Pine Street. But somewhere along those 2 blocks, the scent vanished or became confused among the dozens of other people who had walked those same sidewalks. Divers checked the irrigation canal, though it ran shallow this time of year and ice covered portions of it. Nothing. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew grid patterns over the surrounding prairie. Nothing. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through fields where last year's wheat stubble poked through patches of snow. Nothing. The media arrived on Sunday afternoon. Television crews from Denver set up on Main Street. Reporters interviewed volunteers, filmed search teams, broadcast updates on the evening news. Jennifer and Robert Martinez appeared at a press conference on Monday morning. Jennifer's face had taken on a terrible blankness, the expression of someone whose worst fear had materialized and who could not yet comprehend the scope of it. Robert stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. He read a prepared statement asking anyone with information to come forward. His voice broke twice. Those who knew him said Robert Martinez had always been a quiet man, the type who worked hard and kept to himself, who coached his son's soccer team and mowed his lawn with careful attention to straight lines. Neighbors described him as helpful, always willing to lend tools or assist with minor repairs. But in those first days after Sofia's disappearance, some who watched him closely noticed something they could not quite name. He seemed composed, almost unnaturally so. While Jennifer wept openly, Robert maintained a steady demeanor that struck some observers as either admirable strength or disturbing detachment. Deputies began the painstaking work of establishing timelines. They interviewed every resident along Sofia's route. An elderly woman on Pine Street remembered seeing a girl matching Sofia's description walking past her house around 9:30 that morning. She noticed because the girl's purple sweater had caught her attention. A man retrieving his newspaper saw a child he thought might have been Sofia, but he could not be certain of the time. The gaps between confirmed sightings created windows of possibility, spaces where something could have happened. Investigators requested phone records. They examined surveillance footage from the few businesses that had cameras. The hardware store's external camera had captured grainy footage of Pine Street, but the angle was wrong and the timestamp showed nothing useful. They checked registered offenders in the area. They ran background checks on every adult male within a 2-mile radius. They found nothing that pointed in any particular direction. Clears throat. By Wednesday, 5 days after Sofia's disappearance, the search had covered more than 40 square miles. Volunteers continued arriving, though the numbers had begun to diminish as people returned to work and school. The story remained on the news, but had moved from the top headline to the second or third segment. This was the natural progression of such cases. The initial explosion of attention, the sustained effort, then the gradual fatting as days passed without resolution. It was during this phase that investigators turned their attention more intensely to the family itself. Statistics support this focus. In cases of missing children, family members or someone known to the family are responsible in a significant percentage of instances. Detectives interviewed Jennifer and Robert separately. They asked about their marriage, their finances, their daily routines. They asked if there had been any conflicts with Sophia. They asked about Robert's employment history, about the stress of losing his manufacturing job, about how he spent his time. Jennifer answered every question with desperate cooperation. She provided names of friends, teachers, anyone who had contact with Sophia. She gave permission for searches of their home, their vehicles, their financial records. She submitted to a polygraph examination and showed no deception. Her grief was transparent and all-consuming. Robert also cooperated, but his demeanor raised quiet questions among some investigators. He answered questions calmly. He showed little emotion during interviews that would reduce most parents to incoherence. When asked about his activities on Saturday morning, he provided a detailed account. Left for work at 6:45, arrived at the warehouse by 7:15, clocked in at 7:22, worked until his supervisor found him with the news about Sophia around noon. Deputies verified his employment. They spoke to his supervisor. They checked the warehouse security footage. Everything aligned with Robert's account. He had been at work when Sophia disappeared. The timeline seemed ironclad, and yet some investigators found themselves troubled by small inconsistencies they could not quite articulate. The way he spoke about Sophia in past tense. The fact that he had returned to work after 3 days while Jennifer could barely function. The strange absence of anger or rage at whoever had taken his daughter. One detective would later write in his notes, "Subject maintains unusual composure. Responses feel rehearsed. When asked about his daughter, shows less emotion than when discussing his former job at the plant. Cannot establish probable cause, but instinct suggests closer examination warranted." The physical evidence told them almost nothing. Sophia had simply vanished. No signs of struggle. No witnesses to an abduction. No vehicle seen in the area at the relevant time. No ransom demand. No body. The absence of evidence became its own kind of testimony, suggesting either extraordinary luck on the part of a perpetrator or someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As February turned to March, the active search operation scaled back. The command center closed. Volunteers returned to their lives. The FBI agents went back to Denver. Local deputies continued working the case, following leads that came in through the tip line. But the investigation had entered that difficult phase where momentum slows and hope begins its terrible erosion. The missing person posters remained on telephone poles and store windows. Sophia's school photo smiling from beneath the word missing. But the town gradually resumed its normal rhythms. People going to work and school and church, living their lives while carrying the weight of an unanswered question. The Martinez family remained in their house on Cottonwood Drive through the spring. Jennifer took a leave of absence from her job. Robert continued working. Gabriel returned to school but became withdrawn, sitting alone at recess, drawing pictures that his teacher found disturbing enough to mention to the school counselor. The family existed in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for news that did not come, living in a house that still contained Sophia's room exactly as she had left it. Her purple journal on the nightstand, her bookshelf organized alphabetically. her bed made with the precision she had always insisted upon. The silence. 14 months after Sofia Martinez disappeared, in April of 2010, Jennifer and Robert packed their belongings and moved to a town 60 miles away. They told the few people they spoke to that they needed a fresh start, that staying in the house where Sofia had lived, walking past the park where the search teams had gathered, seeing the route she had taken that morning, had become unbearable. The new town was larger, a place where they could be anonymous, where every trip to the grocery store did not involve encountering someone who looked at them with pity or suspicion. They rented a small apartment. Robert found work at another warehouse. Jennifer eventually returned to dental hygiene at a new practice where no one knew her story. Gabriel enrolled in 3rd grade at a school where his classmates had never heard of Sofia Martinez. They tried to build something resembling a normal life from the wreckage of what they had lost. But those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have ever felt the terrible weight of unspoken questions, understand that some silences grow heavier with time rather than lighter. The marriage that had already shown cracks before Sofia's disappearance now deteriorated in ways both obvious and subtle. Jennifer began attending a support group for parents of missing children. She met other people who understood the particular agony of not knowing, of existing in the liminal space between hope and grief. She learned that some members had waited years, decades, for answers that never came. At home, she and Robert spoke less and less. Entire days would pass with only the most necessary communication. "What are you making for dinner? I will be late from work. Did you pay the electric bill?" The substance of their lives reduced to logistics and routine. Gabriel existed in the space between them, a quiet child who had learned that certain topics could not be discussed, that his sister's name was a landmine that could detonate the fragile peace his parents maintained. Clear's throat. In the 2nd year after the move, Gabriel began having nightmares. He would wake screaming, unable or unwilling to describe what he had seen. Jennifer would go to him, hold him until the trembling stopped, rock him the way she had when he was small. On one of these nights, when Gabriel was 8 years old, he said something that made Jennifer's blood freeze. He said, "I saw Daddy put Sofia in the truck." Jennifer asked him what he meant. Gabriel would not elaborate. He seemed to retreat back into sleep or perhaps into a protective silence. Jennifer sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, listening to him breathe, trying to understand what she had just heard. A dream. It had to be a dream. Children had nightmares. They confused imagination with memory, but the words echoed in her mind with a weight that felt like truth. She did not mention it to Robert. Instead, she began paying attention in new ways. She noticed how he never spoke about Sofia unless directly asked. She noticed that he had discarded or donated all the photographs that had been displayed in their previous home. She noticed that when the anniversary of Sofia's disappearance approached each February, he became irritable and distant, working longer hours, coming home exhausted and uncommunicative. In the summer of 2012, Jennifer told Robert she wanted a separation. She said she could not continue living this way. She said they needed space. Robert did not argue. He moved into a studio apartment across town. Gabriel stayed with Jennifer. They established a custody arrangement that felt more like ritual than genuine co-parenting. Robert would pick up Gabriel on Wednesday evenings and every other weekend. They would go to movies or miniature golf, activities that required minimal conversation. Jennifer waited until Robert had been gone for 3 months before she made the phone call that would resurrect the investigation. She called the detective who had been the lead investigator on Sofia's case, a man named Thomas Rivera, who had since been promoted to sergeant, but who still carried the case file in his mind, still wondered about the girl who had vanished on a February morning. Rivera listened as Jennifer described Gabriel's nightmare. His statement about seeing his father put Sophia in a truck. She told him about Robert's behavior, about the emotional distance, about her growing conviction that her husband knew more than he had revealed. She said she had no proof, only a mother's instinct and a child's disturbing words spoken in the aftermath of a nightmare. She said she understood if this was not enough to reopen the case, but she needed to tell someone. She needed someone to know what she suspected. Rivera thanked her for calling. He said he would look into it. He made notes. He pulled the old case file and read through it again with fresh eyes, looking for things they might have missed, inconsistencies that might have seemed insignificant at the time but which now took on new meaning. He noted that Robert had been at work when Sophia disappeared. The alibi had checked out, but Rivera began wondering about the hours before Robert had left for his shift. He requested the original phone records again. He looked at the timeline. Robert had left home at 6:45 in the morning. Sophia had disappeared at approximately 9:30. But what if the sequence of events had been different than everyone assumed? What if something had happened before Robert left for work? Clear's throat. Rivera started making quiet inquiries. He contacted the warehouse where Robert had been working in 2009. The facility had since changed ownership, but old employee records were archived. Rivera examined them. He found something interesting. Robert's time card showed he had clocked in at 7:22 in the morning, but there was a notation that he had been late, that he was supposed to start at 7. The warehouse was approximately 20 minutes from the Martinez home on Cottonwood Drive. If Robert had left at 6:45, he should have arrived with time to spare. Rivera checked traffic records from that morning. No accidents or delays that would explain a longer drive. He measured the distance himself, 18.7 miles. Even in Saturday morning traffic, it should not have taken more than 25 minutes. Where had Robert been during that extra time? Rivera knew this was circumstantial at best. Perhaps Robert had stopped for coffee or gas. Perhaps the timeline was simply imprecise. But combined with Gabriel's statement and Jennifer's growing suspicions, it created a thread worth pulling. He requested a meeting with the county prosecutor to discuss whether there was sufficient basis to reopen the investigation. The prosecutor listened. She agreed the circumstances were troubling but noted the obvious problem. No body, no physical evidence, a key witness who was a child reporting what might have been a dream. She said they needed more. Rivera understood. He had worked enough cases to know that suspicion was not the same as proof. For the next year, Rivera worked the case in whatever spare time he could find. He re-interviewed witnesses. He checked whether any new evidence had emerged. He examined other cold cases in the region to see if there were patterns or connections. He found nothing concrete, but he also could not let it go. Sophia Martinez deserved more than a file gathering dust in a cabinet. In November of 2013, Gabriel turned 11 years old. He was in 5th grade. Jennifer had been taking him to a therapist, a woman who specialized in childhood trauma. In one session, the therapist asked Gabriel about his memories of his sister. Gabriel had been reluctant to discuss Sophia for years, but something in the therapeutic relationship had created enough safety for him to begin opening up. He told the therapist what he remembered about that Saturday morning. He said he had been watching cartoons in the living room. He said his father had been in the garage. He said he heard his father's truck start, heard it pull out of the driveway, but that his father had come back inside a short time later. He said his mother had been upstairs taking a shower. He said when Sophia left the house, his father had gone outside too, not immediately, but soon after. Gabriel said he remembered thinking it was strange because his father was supposed to be at work. The therapist took careful notes. She understood the ethical and legal complexities of memory, especially in children, especially years after the fact. Memory was unreliable. It could be contaminated by suggestion, by later information, by the mind's attempt to create narrative coherence from fragments. But she also understood that children sometimes held pieces of truth that adults had overlooked. With Jennifer's permission, the therapist contacted Sergeant Rivera. She explained the therapeutic context. She said she could not definitively state that Gabriel's memories were accurate, but she believed they were genuinely what Gabriel remembered. Rivera requested permission to conduct a formal forensic interview with Gabriel. Jennifer agreed. Robert, when contacted, initially refused to allow it, then relented under pressure from his attorney, who advised that refusing would look worse than cooperating. The revelation. The forensic interview took place on January 14, 2014, nearly 5 years after Sophia had disappeared. It was conducted by a trained specialist in a neutral location designed to be comfortable for children. Jennifer waited in another room. The interview was recorded. Gabriel, now 11, seemed younger than his years, small for his age, speaking softly and often looking down at his hands. The interviewer took her time establishing rapport. She asked Gabriel about school, about his hobbies, about ordinary things that had nothing to do with his sister. Only after he seemed comfortable did she gently ask him to tell her what he remembered about the morning Sophia had disappeared. Gabriel's account, delivered haltingly over the course of 40 minutes, was this. He remembered watching cartoons. He remembered his mother upstairs. He remembered his father had already been dressed for work and was doing something in the garage. He remembered hearing the truck start. He remembered his father coming back inside, going upstairs briefly, then going back outside. He remembered Sophia asking permission to go to Emma's house. He remembered his mother saying yes. He remembered Sophia leaving. Then Gabriel said something he had never told anyone before. He said he had gotten bored with the cartoons and had gone outside to ride his bike. He said he saw his father's truck still parked on the street, not in the driveway but on the street in front of the house. He said he saw Sophia get into the truck. He said his father was in the driver's seat. He said they drove away. The interviewer asked gentle follow-up questions. How did Gabriel know it was Sophia who got into the truck? He saw her purple sweater. How did he know it was his father driving? He recognized the truck, a green Chevrolet with rust on the tailgate. What did Gabriel do after seeing them drive away? He went back inside. He went back to watching cartoons. Did he think it was strange? No. He thought maybe his father was driving Sophia to Emma's house. Why had Gabriel never mentioned this before? He said he did not think about it until later. He said when everyone started looking for Sophia, he thought she must have gotten out of the truck at some point and gone somewhere else. He said he did not understand that what he had seen was important. He was 6 years old at the time. His understanding of cause and effect, of timelines and consequences, had been that of a very young child. Clears throat. The interview ended. The specialist met with Sergeant Rivera and the county prosecutor. They discussed the legal implications. A child's testimony, especially one recounting events from 5 years earlier, would be challenged in court. Defense attorneys would argue contamination, false memory, coaching. But it was also the first break in a case that had been cold for nearly half a decade. Rivera made the decision to bring Robert Martinez in for questioning. On February 3, 2014, 2 deputies arrived at Robert's apartment. They asked him to come to the station to answer some additional questions about Sophia's case. Robert agreed. He did not ask for an attorney. He drove his own vehicle to the station and sat across from Rivera in an interview room with beige walls and a table bolted to the floor. Rivera informed Robert that the interview would be recorded. He read Robert his rights. Robert waived them, saying he had nothing to hide. Rivera began with open-ended questions about the morning Sophia disappeared. Robert repeated the same account he had given 5 years earlier. He left for work at 6:45. He arrived at the warehouse around 7:15. He clocked in late. He worked until receiving the call about Sophia. Rivera then introduced Gabriel's statement. He said a witness had reported seeing Sophia get into Robert's truck that morning. Robert's face, which had maintained its characteristic lack of expression, changed. Not dramatically, but those watching through the one-way glass would later describe it as a subtle settling, as if something he had been holding carefully in place had shifted. Robert said that was impossible. He had been at work. Rivera pointed out the timeline issue, the extra time between Robert leaving home and clocking in. Where had Robert been during those 30 minutes? Robert said he stopped for coffee. Rivera asked where. Robert named a gas station. Rivera had already checked. The gas station had closed 6 months before Sophia's disappearance. The interview continued for 3 hours. Rivera methodically dismantled Robert's timeline. He presented phone records showing that Robert's cell had pinged off a tower near the Martinez home at 7:32 in the morning, not near the warehouse. He presented the odometer reading from Robert's truck, which had been documented during the initial investigation, showing mileage that did not align with a direct trip from home to work. Robert began to sweat. He asked for water. He said he might have made a mistake about the coffee stop. He said it had been 5 years and he could not remember every detail. Rivera waited. Silence is a tool in interrogation. People fill silence. They explain, they revise, they sometimes reveal. At the 4-hour mark, Robert asked for an attorney. The interview ended, but Rivera had enough. The discrepancies, Gabriel's testimony, the cell phone data, all of it created probable cause. The county prosecutor agreed. On February 5, 2014, an arrest warrant was issued for Robert Martinez on suspicion of first-degree murder. Robert was arrested at his workplace. Deputies found him in the warehouse sorting packages. They handcuffed him in front of his coworkers. They read him his rights again. They transported him to the county jail. The news broke that evening. Television stations ran the story as breaking news. The community that had mourned Sophia's disappearance 5 years earlier reacted with shock and anger. Those who had known Robert, who had worked with him and lived near him, struggled to reconcile the quiet man they knew with the charges he now faced. Some maintained his innocence, insisting there must be a mistake. Others recalled moments that now seemed suspicious in retrospect. His composure, his quick return to work, his emotional distance. Jennifer Martinez released a brief statement through an attorney. She said she had long suspected that Robert knew more than he had revealed. She said she hoped the truth would finally emerge. She asked for privacy for herself and Gabriel. The media camped outside the courthouse. Reporters sought comments from anyone connected to the case. Clears throat. The legal proceedings moved slowly through the system. Robert's attorney filed motions to suppress Gabriel's testimony, arguing it was unreliable and prejudicial. The prosecutor countered that the testimony was corroborated by physical evidence. The timeline, the cell phone data, the odometer reading. Pretrial hearings stretched across months. During this period, investigators received a tip from a woman who had lived near the Martinez family in 2009. She said she had been afraid to come forward at the time, but she remembered seeing Robert Martinez's truck parked at a trailhead near the irrigation canal on the morning of February 14th, around 8:30. She remembered because her dog had gotten loose, and she had been searching for it. She had driven past and recognized the green truck with rust on the tailgate. At the time, she thought nothing of it. People used the trailhead for running and hiking. But now, knowing what she knew, she felt compelled to report it. Rivera interviewed the woman extensively. Her account added another piece to the timeline. If Robert had been at the trailhead at 8:30, and if Sophia had gotten into his truck at approximately 9:20, the sequence suggested premeditation, a plan executed in stages. Investigators searched the area around the trailhead again, this time with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing. Either Sophia's remains were somewhere they had not searched, or Robert had hidden her body with care that had allowed it to remain undiscovered for 5 years. The trial began in October of 2015. The prosecution's case rested on Gabriel's testimony, the timeline discrepancies, the cell phone data, and the witness who had seen Robert's truck at the trailhead. The defense argued that all of this was circumstantial, that Gabriel's memory was unreliable, that the timeline issues could be explained by innocent factors, that there was no body and therefore no proof that Sophia was even deceased, let alone that Robert had harmed her. Gabriel testified on the third day of trial. He was 12 years old. He wore a button-down shirt that seemed too large for him. He answered questions in a voice so quiet the judge had to ask him twice to speak louder. He repeated what he remembered about seeing Sophia get into his father's truck. Defense attorneys cross-examined him carefully, aware that being too aggressive with a child witness could alienate the jury. They asked how he could be certain about details from so long ago. Gabriel said he just remembered. He said he had tried to forget but could not. Jennifer testified as well. She described the morning Sophia disappeared. She described her growing suspicions about Robert. She described the moment Gabriel had spoken about seeing his father with Sophia. She wept on the stand. The jury watched her carefully. Robert did not testify. His attorney advised against it. The prosecution rested after 8 days of testimony. The defense called witnesses who spoke to Robert's character, people who described him as a good father and a hard worker. They presented an alternate theory, that Sophia had been abducted by a stranger after getting into Robert's truck, that Robert had given her a ride but left her alive. The jury deliberated for 6 days. On November 4, 2015, they returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Robert showed no reaction as the verdict was read. Jennifer closed her eyes. Gabriel sat beside her, holding her hand. Sentencing occurred 3 weeks later. The judge sentenced Robert Martinez to 40 years to life in prison. He would be eligible for parole after serving 32 years. The judge noted the particularly heinous nature of the crime. A father who had betrayed the trust of his own child, who had allowed that child's mother and brother to suffer years of not knowing, who had participated in searches while knowing exactly what had happened. Robert was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Jennifer and Gabriel left through a side exit to avoid the media. Sergeant Rivera stood on the courthouse steps and gave a brief statement. He said justice had been served, though justice could not return Sophia Martinez to her family. He said he hoped the conviction would provide some measure of closure. Closing. The case of Sophia Martinez represents a particular kind of tragedy, a betrayal from within the safest space a child should know. For those who followed the investigation across 6 years, the resolution brought no satisfaction, only the grim acknowledgement that the worst suspicions had been confirmed. Sophia's body has never been recovered. Robert Martinez has never revealed what happened to her or where she might be found. Jennifer and Gabriel Martinez moved again after the trial, seeking distance from the attention and the memories. On a shelf in Jennifer's home, wherever that home may now be, sits a purple journal that a 9-year-old girl once used to write about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. That journal, and the memory of the child who wrote in it, remains the truest testimony to a life cut short by incomprehensible violence. Sophia Martinez deserved the future she planned for herself, the ordinary progression of growing up and becoming whoever she might have been. She deserved to be remembered as more than a case file, more than a cautionary tale, more than a name on a missing person poster. She deserved to ride her bike and work on art projects with her best friend and wake up on countless ordinary Saturday mornings. Justice, such as it was, came too late to give her any of those things. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.